Hi everyone, I just wanted to say thank you so much for listening to How to Be Irish. Whether you've listened to one episode or all five of the episodes so far, I'm just delighted to have you here with me. But if you have enjoyed it, I would really appreciate it if you could take the time to give me a rating, whether that's on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, or you can just tell a friend about it. I think word of mouth is such a fantastic way to spread a podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, I also do have a Patreon. Patreon is basically a place where you can give someone a very small token of money to say thank you to them for their work. I'd love to hear what you do think. So, you can leave comments on this or you can comment on the Instagram as well. Please do engage because it does help the podcast to reach more of an audience and hopefully grow the podcast. And we can all find out what every single Irish person thinks about what it means to be Irish. So, Gurv Mila Mila Mahagwif. Daragh Fleming is a writer from Cork. He was also the founder of the award-winning mental health blog Thoughts Too Big. His debut non-fiction book, Lonely Boy, was published in 2022 by Book Hub Publishing. He has work appearing in several literary magazines, including The Ogham Stone, Bear Bua, Trasna, Stand, Gutter, and more. He was also highly commended for both the Patrick Kavanagh Award and the Fool for Poetry Prize in 2023, and was shortlisted for the Alpine Fellowship Poetry Prize. Daragh was also recently shortlisted for the Mental Health Media Award for his TEDx talk on using creativity to enhance and maintain our mental health. Daragh, welcome to the How to Be Irish studio. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I was actually reflecting earlier and I was thinking, I think more than half of my guests have actually been from Cork so far. So I should probably rename it to How to Be from Cork, to be honest with you. But anyways, all the good people come from Cork, sure look. I want to chat to you today loads about mental health, about creativity, about writing. But I suppose I want to start off by asking you about your journey with mental health and where that began and how it got to where you are today, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Absolutely. And yeah, thanks for having me on. Cork people do tend to pop up absolutely everywhere. So I'm not surprised by that little anecdote. So yeah, mental health and me, like it's it started terribly. Unfortunately. So like when I grew up in a kind of like idyllic childhood, had great family, great brother, very like unnotable childhood. It was just easygoing fun, and I'm very very blessed to have that. Like if I came from a good background, played basketball my whole life, and then when I was 17, my best friend took his own life, which was a complete shell shock. Changed my whole life. I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now in any capacity if that hadn't happened. Um, and it's because like we didn't know he was struggling. Um, and one day he was here, and the next day he was gone. And back then, this is 2012. No one was talking about mental health, so he was very much masking. Like obviously he was struggling, but when he was around us, he was always like happy and outgoing and just up for having the crack. But obviously when he was on his own, he was struggling quite severely. So my introduction to mental health was it can get so bad that it can kill you. And that's how I found out about mental health. Like before that, I hadn't really heard about mental health. I'd heard about suicide, but to me, that was something that happened on TV, or it happened to people who came from other places. Like it hadn't touched my life. So that was my introduction, and my grief for Irby, because he's my best friend, went on for quite a long time. Then that morphed into depression, but again, because of the lack of education, I didn't know I had depression. I thought suicide was being sad all the time. I thought that's what depression was. Again, based on the little I knew from TV and movies, like you see these stereotypical depictions of depression. But for me, I just wasn't feeling anything. So I wasn't feeling sad, but I wasn't feeling happy, and I wasn't feeling excited or angry. And that's what I just thought that's what being an adult was. I was like, okay, this is just the hand we've been dealt. Every adult is pretending to have emotions. And that went on for, 4.5 years before I got help. Before I realized, it's 3 years until I realized I had it, because I studied applied psychology in UCC. And then we were studying depression, and I kind of saw myself in the symptoms and found out about the emotional numbness and all that. And then it took a further year and the panic attack for me to actually get help. And that was at the end of my second year in college. And then we kind of crawled out from beneath depression from there. Found writing, found that really helpful for treating my depression and exploring my emotions and coming back to an emotional life. And it's kind of been, yeah, the most important thing in my life since then.
Yeah, you very much have centered a lot of your writing around mental health. And I think that you communicate some things that are hold so much gravity and are quite complex things to communicate, but you do it in such a simple, matter of fact, quite frank and quite honest almost. It's like quite stark.
Mm.
But I mean it's so important like that it has been communicated in that way. You
Mm.
mentioned there how you were obviously studying psychology in college and you had been suffering from depression for quite a few years after your friend took his own life. Um, how did you figure out that you had depression and how did you deal with it at that point? What was that like for you?
Mm. Um, I kind of knew, maybe, like, I had, it's tricky because I was very much self stigmatizing and denying what I was feeling. So, but if you kind of look back and look at my behaviors at the time, it was obvious something was going on. Like, I very much avoided spending time on my own. Didn't like that because that's when the kind of loneliness came in, and the negative self talk and the guilt and the just really heavy emotions came in. So I was like, it's interesting because, like, from the outside looking in, when I was in college, I just kind of looked like I was thriving because I was either
Mm.
studying or playing basketball or socializing or working, and I was always really busy. But I was just avoiding. I was really afraid to spend time on my own, and I knew that, but I denied that it was a problem. I was like, no, this is just, you're just staying busy. But I knew I was avoiding something, and I was avoiding, like, dealing with the, like, heavy weight of the emotions that came with, like, experiencing a very close person die by suicide. And then, yeah, like, literally, like, learning about clinical depression and different forms of depression in lectures, like, I was fascinated by it. And then there was part of me that knew we were learning about something I was dealing with, and part of me that was denying that I was dealing with that. And it was all this stuff. And then I had a panic attack on the street on a night out. And that was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, because I'd never had a panic attack. And the next morning I woke up, and, like, I had just gotten into, like, taking, like, not that often, but, like, taking drugs. And that wasn't something I'd ever do. And, like, I was probably drinking too much. And yeah, the next morning after that, I was like, there's something wrong. Like, this has never happened. The way I'm living isn't me. I don't feel like myself. I feel like I'm putting on this show. And it just felt like admitting that to myself, like, took so much weight off of my shoulders. I was like, I need to stop pretending I'm okay, because I'm just, like, using everything and anything to, like, get little blips of, like, dopamine and serotonin. And, like, that can go from healthy stuff like exercising and, volunteering, to, like, drinking too much, having too much casual sex, drug abuse. Like, so I was like, you're just grasping at anything you can to stay afloat, and we really just need to get this sorted because it's not sustainable. So it was after that that I kind of realized, like, I'd kind of known all along, but was happy to deny it. But after that, I was like, we need to figure something out.
Hmm. And what did you do in that moment? Like, how did you start to turn that corner for yourself? What habits did you introduce?
Well, luckily, I was doing psychology, so a lot of my friends had been going to student counseling
Mm.
in UCC. So talking to them about it didn't feel like a big deal. And I think, when you have depression, it feels like such a hard thing to talk about. But talking to them, it just kind of felt like normal conversation, which is always what we've been trying to do since then. It's just to make it a normal conversation. So they put me in touch with, like, who I needed to get in touch with for counseling. And then the next hurdle for me was, like, telling my parents. I was really afraid to tell my parents because there was a part of me, and this is anxiety, that was like, they're going to be ashamed of you, they're going to see you different, they're going to be disappointed, all this stuff. So I eventually built up the courage, signed up for counselling, built up the courage to tell them at dinner one night, and they couldn't have been more supportive and loving and just wanting the best for me and wanting me to get help. And that kind of taught me that, like, okay, my brain is just unreliable at the moment. It's just lying to me about things. It's making me believe things that aren't true. So once I told them, I was like, right, I don't have to pretend and mask anymore and pretend I'm okay. I can just like live in this and like actually allow myself to feel the way I'm feeling rather than pretending everything's okay when I'm in public and then feeling horrible when I'm on my own. Um, so I think even admitting to my parents was a huge step for me, and then going to therapy that first time for, I think I went for 12 weeks. Um, and then after that summer, I started Thoughts Too Big, which is the blog, and that like obviously helps other people. But for the last 10 years, it's been like my public journal. Like it helps me to work through stuff as well, and that was a real important milestone for me because it gave me something that felt worthwhile and productive, and also helped my mental health at the same time.
So with Thoughts Too Big, was that something that came about as a result of having depression, or were you kind of always interested in writing?
Well, no, I was always interested in writing. Like, I wrote my first poem when I was 7, first short story when I was 11, was like an avid reader as a child. Like, I remember my parents sat me down when I was like 10 and they were like, you need to join a library because we can't sustain how much money we're spending on books, which is hilarious. And I remember even like stuff like lining up at midnight with my aunt Sinead to get the new Harry Potters and all this stuff. Like, it was a big part of my life. And then, so I'd always been writing. Then I suppose in secondary school, it kind of fell off. I was still interested, but I went to an all boys school, so I had to pretend I wasn't interested in things like poetry because there would have been, teasing and getting picked on for that kind of stuff, which is ridiculous, but that's the
Mhm.
world we lived in. Um, and then, yeah, like Thoughts Too Big initially wasn't solely about mental health. It was just like a like a teenage young adult blog where I kind of ranted about everything. Like, and then maybe a year in, I was like, we need to focus this. And the thing that was the most important thing in my life was mental health. And
Mm.
the whole premise of the work I've done since then is just to prevent suicide and to get people to talk about their mental health. Like, they're two simple goals, but that doesn't mean they're easy to accomplish. But they're like not that complicated. It's like, I just want people to stop dying by suicide. That's
Mhm.
quite simple, but making that a reality is obviously a societal hurdle we need to do together.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, in the last 10 years, like, it's come on leaps and bounds. And I think, in particular, Irish society almost has even more stigma when it comes to talking about mental health, perhaps tied into a bit of like Catholic shame, or
Hmm.
I don't know, like it's like you kind of almost can't show that vulnerability, or you can't show that level of emotion. And
Hmm.
particularly also for like men, obviously, like that is extremely challenging to show that vulnerability. From
Hmm.
somebody who's been working and writing in that space for so long, Dara, as an Irish man, like how do you feel it has developed, and how much more do we have to do, and how can we change that?
Yeah, there's a lot come to mind. I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we've nailed the awareness piece. Like, people are aware of mental health and different mental illnesses and what to do. We're kind of at a point now, which is interesting, where we're all encouraging other people to talk about their mental health if they need to, while simultaneously never talking about it ourselves.
Mm.
So it's kind of like do as I say, not as I do, which I think in this context doesn't work. I think in order, like, the reason I have so much conversations with people about mental health is because I actually talk about mental health, and then people know I'm someone they can talk to about mental health. So the amount of people who just like text me or message me or come up to me, you know, privately and want to talk with, because they know I'm a place where they can talk. So I think if we want other people to talk, we have to become people who talk. And then the thing, I suppose, with men in particular, we're trying to undo generations of conditioning. And like, even, and it's up until recently, I remember I seen, and like, this is no one in my family's fault, like, this is just society. Like, but when I reached the age of like 5 or 6, if I started crying about anything, it was like, you're a big boy, you don't cry now. That like you get to a certain age as a boy, and it's like, right, crying's done now. um,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, depending on context, like, um, so we're undoing a lot of like like generational conditioning, and I think we're lacking patience. I think it will happen, and I think you're seeing it in Gen Z and whatever the generation after Gen Z is called. They're very good at expressing their emotions and talking about it and leaving them out and expressing themselves. But we seem to want things to change overnight, and there's almost a frustration with men at the moment where it's like society's encouraging us to talk, but we're still kind of resistant to it because we're like trying to undo like how we've been brought up our whole lives. And you have people, and there will always be people like this, and that's why I know we're going in the right direction, like trailblazers. So you have your blind boys, you have your Brezzies, the two Naris, you have all these people who are men who are talking openly about their mental health, and that means in another 10 years, people like that won't seem like exceptions to the rule. It'll just be something everyone does. So we're getting there, but there's just still a lot of, I think we just need patience, and we need to actually practice what we preach. And if we're telling other people to talk about our mental health, then we also need to talk about our own.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a huge amount of bravery that comes in doing that.
Hmm.
I think you mentioned before that you found writing was almost a way for you to kind of like it brings that bravery for you because you're just putting your thoughts down in writing. You don't have to necessarily like speak directly about something, but it's being communicated in like a creative way.
Hmm.
And you did a TEDx talk and you talked about how creativity can be used to help you heal. I'd love to hear more about that and how you found creativity as like a tool for healing for you.
Mm. Yeah, with the writing thing, I suppose like it does put something between you and the person you're talking to, because it's not like you have to say the words. It's like a precursor to talking. So like while I was getting used to being able to talk about my mental health, writing about it was easier because one, I didn't necessarily ever have to share that writing with anyone if I didn't want to, but it was just getting used to actually like expressing these kind of devastating emotions and loneliness and how I was feeling, and getting used to like, actually seeing the words on paper helped me to like accept that's how I was feeling, which is why I'd encourage anyone who's like building up to talking about mental health to start with writing, because you just get used to it. And it can just be cathartic in its own sense, in its own right. But then yeah, with creativity and mental health, I never really intended to be a poet, quote unquote. I don't really reference myself as a poet, but I found that when I started journaling coming out of therapy, my journaling style was just kind of poetic. It was like, and not like just kind of poetic, that doesn't really explain anything, but it was just like short bursts of thoughts. They're just kind of little verses of like, this how I'm feeling and whatever. Uh, which is, can be poetry. Um, but I found that like because I was coming out of depression, I still had to like re-engage with my emotions, and at the start, it kind of felt like there was a spark of an emotion, like a little just spark of it, and writing about those emotions, like the tiny bit I was feeling, helped me to kind of like fan the flame and feel it a bit more. So I'd write about everything. Like I'd write about if I was feeling a spark of sadness, I'd write about sadness and feel sad, feel angry, feel disappointed, feel happy, because it was just about like feeling negative emotions was better than feeling no emotions. And then when happiness started coming in and excitement, or if I had a crush on someone, like writing about all these things made me like feel these emotions. And like for the past 4 years before that, I wasn't feeling anything, so it was good to feel anything. Um, and that's kind of how I like started writing poetry. And then it just so happened that like one day I wrote a poem. I sent it to a friend who's a poet. She really liked it, and she was an editor in a magazine, and they published it. And then I was like, oh, maybe I can do this. And that's how that kind of rolled into now having like two poetry books and a TED talk about poetry, which is wild. But it was very much a mental health tool in the first instance. Like,
Mm, yeah. And you can tell that by it. Like it almost feels in a way, I suppose, as I said earlier, like it's so honest, you're writing. So it does feel like almost like a diary entry in a way.
mm-hmm.
But like it kind of, I feel like you find a way of, because poetry can obviously be like quite pretentious sometimes, like as you said
Hmm.
beforehand, like you didn't want to say in school that like you liked reading or you like poems because people might be calling you names or something like that. But it's like you're trying to like convey so much in like in so little in a way.
Hmm.
And obviously, you know, sometimes it can become pretentious, but like what is your advice for someone perhaps who is interested in poetry but maybe fears like that stigma around pretension, or like is too scared to get started, or doesn't know
Hmm.
how to start, or doesn't know how to like you said, like you had a friend who was a poet, so that maybe might have helped a little bit in order like to figure out like, oh, I can actually send the off to a publication and, you know, maybe
Hmm.
they might actually publish it. Like what kind of advice would you give for somebody who's interested in expressing themselves through writing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and like it's so true. I like, for the most part, like I liked poetry as a teenager, but I kind of hated most poetry in that, like, that kind of esoteric, vague, hard to understand,
Mm.
like purposefully kind of, difficult poetry. I was like, this isn't accessible for like normal people. Um, and over the years, my writing style, both in poetry and outside of poetry, has been described as conversational, and that's on purpose. Like, I want my writing to feel like I'm talking to you, rather than like you have to figure out what I'm saying. So that's why the poetry is very like, you know, unpoetic in its language. It's very simple because I want the person who's reading it to actually understand what I'm saying, as opposed to have to go do homework to figure out the poem. Like,
Yeah.
I want it to be accessible for people, and I think that's where, spoken word in Ireland's having such a moment now, because spoken word's a far more like working class acceptable art form, or accessible art form, and like it's just like poetry for the normal person. Whereas I feel like some, and not all, like, because I obviously write literary poetry as well, some literary poetry can feel quite elitist and for the elites rather than
Mm.
for everyone, because I think poetry should be for everyone. So with that in mind, I would say, like, you know if you're writing poetry, starting to write poetry, just write what makes sense to you. Don't, like, obviously you should be reading lots of poetry and like reading lots of books, and if you're going to be a writer, but like, you don't have to emulate anyone. You can find your own voice. What type of poem would you like to read, or what poem would have been useful for you at a certain moment in your life? Because like,
Mhm.
I do think, like, I'm a very firm believer that words are extremely powerful, and the right words at the right time can change your entire life. And like, even at World Suicide Day, a woman messaged me saying that like a poem I'd posted had literally stopped her from killing herself that day. So I was like, these things do have power, and they can have power. So don't question whether what you're doing is right or wrong or good or bad. Just write what's kind of coming out of you, and then, like, as you continue to do that, you'll get better at seeing what's good about your writing, what's bad about your writing, and tweaking. Um, and then, yeah, there's loads of resources online now, and there's loads of places to submit. Like, there's no lack of places to submit, especially literary journals. Um, and just getting used to that process of getting rejected, because like most of writing is like, even like, well, maybe Sally Rooney's out of that category now, but most writers, who are successful, still get rejected on a daily basis. It's just part of it. It's not personal. It's a numbers game. So just getting used to being rejected and not taking it personally. I think that's some advice I could have used when I started, because at the start I took rejection very personally, and it just causes yourself like unnecessary hurt.
Hmm. Yeah, I think as a creative person, that's like kind of a bit of a universal message. Like I remember I was used to do a bit of work in journalism, and I kind of tried to reignite that about a year ago
Hmm.
or so, and I was pitching to different publications, and I kind of had almost done too much work on the piece beforehand, so I felt too protective over it. So then the
Hmm.
idea of someone like rejecting it, I was like, but I put in all these hours, and it's like, no, like you need to understand, like as you said, it's a numbers game. Like it's the right piece at the right time, it's for the right audience, you know.
Hmm.
News
And it's so
cycles.
subjective, like, but it is true, because like writers, artists, creatives tend to be more sensitive than average. Like, we're quite close to the bone with all our emotions. So it's kind of like evilly ironic that these people tend to be the ones who have to subject themselves voluntarily to the most rejection. Like the
Mm.
most sensitive people have to like deal with the most rejection, which is kind of twisted, but that's the
Mm.
game.
Yeah, it actually got me thinking there. You said like creatives being like some of the most sensitive people. I suppose there's that old age like trope of like the tortured artist.
Mm.
And because a lot of your writing is about mental health and around that theme, Dara, um, do you feel like that you do need to be more sensitive, or maybe you do need to like either be suffering or understand suffering in order to write well?
Mm. I used to think that I had to be mentally unwell to write well,
Mm.
which is dangerous, and it's
Yeah.
not true. Because often now, like I haven't been depressed in years, but I can still tap into that emotion, and I think really what you need is not to be suffering, but to have a lot of empathy and to understand emotion and understand what something would feel like. Like I've written poems about things that have never happened to me that have been like shortlisted for different awards and stuff, and it's just kind of putting yourself in a hypothetical situation of like, okay, if this happened, how would it feel? And and maybe that like in those moments you're going to feel those emotions, like, and it's going to be like, but it's kind of a simulation as opposed to actually forcing yourself to be in pain.
Mm.
Um, so I used to think that like, I was honestly, I remember when I started writing and I got depressed again when I was like 24 and I was writing a lot and I was kind of reluctant to let depression go because I was like, my writing might get bad without this, which is a like really dangerous place to be because and it's just coming from insecurity in your own like ability, because you feel like you need this thing to be good at what you're doing, but in reality you can tap into any emotional, you know experience you've had to write about that. And I think again, as I said, just to reaffirm it, like empathy, if you have a lot of empathy you can imagine any emotion, so you don't need to be suffering in order to write about emotions in a real and like relatable way.
Mm, yeah, that's fantastic answer, I think. Um, it actually got me thinking about like Maeve Binchy. She used
Hmm.
to sit and observe people and like almost be like so nosy, like listening to their conversations, writing them down. It's like so it's almost doing that. It's like you're going out and you're like seeing what is there out in the world, like what can I empathize with, and then how can I bring that into my writing, into my
Hmm.
work.
Yeah.
Um, I want to ask you about something that happened to you. I'm not actually sure how long ago this happened to you, but I saw it online. So you were catfished and
Hmm.
blackmailed on Tinder and then on Snapchat, which is like an absolutely horrific thing to happen to anybody. But you seem to handle it like extremely well from what I could tell online, like almost, you didn't give in to the blackmail and you almost made a bit of comedy out of it in a way. Like, can you talk a little bit about that moment and like what was going through your head? Like it's a horrible thing to happen to anyone, but like an extremely unique situation. Like how do you know what to do in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't know what I should do. I knew what like. I guess I felt was the right thing to do. Yeah, it was horrible. Like, and it's interesting because like online it looks like I handled it without really skipping a beat, but like I was like in a bad way the week it happened. Like, it was a really tough week and very stress-inducing and panic, and yeah, just a real on edge moment. And actually, next Monday, I don't know when this is coming out, but Monday the 21st, I was interviewed by Lucy Kennedy, sorry, for her
Mm.
new show Real Life with Lucy about this actual thing. So if people want to hear the full story, it'll be there. Um, but yeah, so like was just talking to a girl I thought was from Cork, and we were talking for a couple of weeks, and then we switched to like WhatsApp and Snapchat, and just talking regularly. And she was like sending me videos and like saying my name in the videos and all these things. So I was like, this person, like, why would I consider this
Mm.
person isn't real? Like, especially if they're sending videos and saying your name. And then we made plans to meet up like the following Wednesday. This was on a Friday, and then like as things do, they got a little frisky, I suppose, and we were like swap pictures, and that's fine. Like, that happens. I think that's quite a normal thing in this day and age. And then the weekend went on, and then on the Monday morning, I get a message from her on Snapchat, and she just says, "Are you ready?" And I genuinely thought she was talking about the date, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready, but it's not till Wednesday." And then she sent me back all the pictures I'd sent. Like there was 2 or 3 of them. Oh, I didn't want all the pictures. I sent her hundreds of pictures, not 2 or 3 pictures.
Just to clarify.
Yeah, and then and she also sent me screenshots of anyone I was friends with on Facebook who had my second name. So she like they just thought I was related to those people.
Mm.
Um, and then they were like, "You've 10 seconds to tell me to stop. Or I'm going to send these pictures." So I said stop. Then they rang me on Snapchat, and it wasn't her; it was a man, and he was like, you need to send me 2 grand. You've loads of money in Ireland, and we don't have any of that in Nigeria, and I want some of that. And I was like, even in this moment, I was freaking out, but I was still like, come here, man, I'm a poet. Like, I don't make that much money. I think you have the wrong person. And then I hung up on him, and then he rang me back. He got angry. I hung up on him again, blocked him. Then he tried to add me on loads of burner accounts, added me, tried to message me on Instagram. And then on Instagram, he tried to ring me, and he was like, I'll reduce the. So he wanted 2 grand initially,
Hmm.
and he was like, "I'll reduce the price to 500. Be a good man. Don't make me do this." And in my head, I was like, "I'm not making you do anything. Like
Mm.
you're very much doing this out of your own." But anyway, so like, and then to be fair, well, not to be fair, but they stopped. Like I just blocked every account that followed me, and after about 5 hours, they just kind of went quiet. And I was there. And I think the worst thing for me about that situation was that, like, my fear was that the pictures would be sent and I wouldn't know about it. And then
Mm.
people would think I didn't know about it as my pictures were being sent around WhatsApp groups and stuff. And I was like, I want people to know that I know this is happening. So that's when I tweeted about it. And obviously, I made the tweet kind of funny because I said something like, enjoy my nudes if you see them because I'm not paying the money or something like that. And then that went viral, obviously, and then that added, like, so that was very like self-protective. I was just trying to like protect myself and let people know that I knew what was going on, but I didn't really anticipate like how much traction that would get. And then there was the added stress of hundreds of journalists trying to get onto me, which just added to the panic. And some of them were really nice and like empathetic, but other people were just treating me like a commodity.
Mm.
Like I won't name them, but like I remember one big outlet in particular were like, "Oh, would you like to come on the show? We think it would be really good content." And I was like,
Mm.
"I'm having the worst week of my life, and you're calling it good content." I was like, "No, I'm not coming on." But then people who were like really sweet and like wanted me to be okay, I was like, "Yeah, I'll talk to you. That's okay."
Mm. What happened in the end? Like, did they just stop
They just
messaging you?
stopped. Like, so I reported to the guards, and actually, only a month ago, the detective rang me back because it had been like a year. Um, And basically, like, they're just scam farms. So it's just a numbers thing for them. So they just do this to hundreds of people every day. And they get some money out of some people. And if they don't get money, they just kind of move on. Because if they followed through with the threat for everyone, then everyone would know at least one person whose nudes have been leaked. And then the threat wouldn't really have as much power. So the power is in
Mm.
the threat as opposed, at least that's my hypothesis on it. Um, but after that, like, because I was talking about it, and I did make the decision to talk about it because all the work I did in mental health, and because when I was freaking out myself, I was looking up online, and the amount of, in particular, teenagers who take their own lives because of this is devastating. And I was like, well, if I can talk about it and like prove that your life won't end and your world won't be ruined if this happens to you, then hopefully that'll help. And then yeah, the amount of people who reached out that it was happening to, that it did happen to, that their son or daughter it was happening to, um, it kind of made it worthwhile because I was helping someone with this terrible thing that happened to me.
Yeah, my God. I actually didn't even think about that aspect of it, that like by you being totally and utterly honest about the fact that it had happened to you and how it had all come about, that people who are literally going through the exact same thing would go, "Oh Jesus, he was
Hmm.
grand, like nothing actually bad happened in the end."
Yeah,
And like got a few interviews out of it, maybe not always all nice ones, but like yeah,
yeah,
maybe it actually, maybe you got a few more readers of your poetry in the end without
that's
realizing.
it. Like, and I mean, that's kind of a, because look, when it happened, cynically, some people were like, "I think you made this up for clout." Like, I think you've done this just to get attention. And I was like, if I wanted attention, I'd do something less embarrassing, I think. I think I'd come up with something.
Absolutely. I feel
I
like that
was
would be
like,
very
oh.
bottom of the list.
Yeah, it was very cynical, but like, yeah, it was awful. But, and I think it's kind of testament to how far we've come in terms of mental health and like being compassionate, because I think even 10 years ago, if this happened, like, people are losing their jobs, people are getting like probably more hate. Like, most people on Twitter and stuff were like really supportive and kind. I think that's a very good bit of progress we've made, because I think like 10, 20 years ago, if this happened, like, it would have been more life shattering. Whereas now it was like, this is an awful thing that happened, but no one, like, I didn't lose anything over it, bar, maybe some sleep, a little bit of my dignity. I felt quite embarrassed, but like,
Mm.
didn't lose anything like that would have messed up my life.
Yeah,
So we are in a
exactly.
good place in terms of like understanding things like that, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully they'll introduce more supports and legal frameworks in order to help people in those situations, because they're obviously happening a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
can lead to very, very serious things. Um, I want to kind of talk to you more about like Ireland and Irishness and
Mm-hmm.
Irish culture and how it relates to you and your interests, Dara. I
Yes.
suppose to start off about writing. Um, how do you feel about your writing in relation to like Irishness and Irish culture? Do you feel you bring it in? How do you feel it comes in without you realizing?
Great question. I think it comes in different ways. Like, so I think it comes in most prominently because obviously, like, I write, but I'm also a performance poet and I perform my work. And then, like, living abroad, you know, you're the Irish poet. Like, that's kind of your identity, and your accent comes into it, and like the turn of phrase and slang and all that. So that's kind of something you never think about, but it's just part of the work, and it changes the work. Um, and then again, like, from living away from Ireland, I think the grow you have for the place increases, and you kind of see the elements, because when you're there, it's easy to complain about the place. I think that's kind of quite Irish as well, just to like kind of have a bit of a moan about everything, but you do understand home for what it is, and that's not just true for Ireland. I think that's true for every country. You understand why it's home and why it feels like home, because I don't think, even if I live out of Ireland forever, I don't think anywhere else will feel like home. There's a
Mm.
very deep rooted sense of like community and culture, and just the feeling you have there, feeling of safety, for me, for the most part, and just feeling like I belong. I think that's the most strong thing for me. Like, I feel like I really belong in Ireland. But then in my writing, like, yeah, obviously, like, with the mental health work, I'm writing in the context of Irish mental health for the most part. And then for the last few years of the poetry, like, I suppose the last year from being away, I am writing more about Ireland. Like, I've poems called like National Anthem, about like losing, which is basically losing our connection with the language and kind of abandoning it when I was in school, because I just couldn't be arsed learning it. And then as an adult, and I think this is something that's coming up a lot for people now, is like feeling regret for not having actually put in the effort to learn Irish. And I even started taking, at the start of this year, I was taking Irish lessons while living in Spain, taking Irish lessons once a week. And I just think, yeah, it's weird that you get more of a connection when you're outside of Ireland, but I think that's very common.
Mm.
I think that happens to like most expats. But with my work, like, I don't actively, lean on the Irishness of me in my writing, but because my writing's so conversational, it's impossible for it to not bleed in. Like, the turns of phrase, the way we talk about things, the way we don't talk about things. I think it just automatically comes in, and I'm happy for that, because I wouldn't want to be like, if someone read my work, that they wouldn't necessarily know where it's from, because I think
Mm.
there's something about our identity in all of our art that bleeds through. And I think, say if you're from America or the UK, I don't think it's as strong in that writing to know where the person's from by how they write or create.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned there about, how you notice more things about Ireland when you left. So you live in Barcelona now. How long ago have you been living in Barcelona for?
I moved last September, so just over a year.
Okay, so same as myself. And
Mhm.
how have you found then? Like, do you find that your pride has gone up, or do you find that your writing has it contains more references to Ireland, or how has your perspective changed on Ireland since you've left?
Mm. Definitely writing more explicitly about Ireland since being here. Like I've written about, because I always get asked like in at shows what it means to be Irish. Like what's the main thing about being Irish? And obviously people joke about like drinking and potatoes and all that, but I like really think about that question because like I get asked enough that I'm like I better have a good answer. Um, so I have been writing a lot more about like Ireland and what it is and what could be improved. When I was there, when I was living there, I never had this like explicit love for the place. It was just because, like if you live anywhere for long enough, you kind of start taking it for granted. But since leaving, I really have like a gratitude for Ireland and I miss it. And sometimes when I'm there, I don't want to come back, which is kind of a weird thing because when I was living there, I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. So yeah, there's definitely more of a a, a pride, but not like a bad pride, like not like
Mm.
nationalism or it's patriotic, but not in like a bad way. It's just like being proud of our culture and proud of our impact on the world, and especially in my line of work, like when I think about how small Ireland is and how much incredible writers there has been and currently is, first it makes me really like proud to be part of that, but it also makes me feel very, very terrified because I'm like, how am I going to match up to all these incredible writers like your James Joyce, Oscar Wilde, your Yeats, and then like contemporaries like Wendy Erskine, Lucy Home, Louise Kennedy, Louise Nealon. There's an amazing amount of writers doing great work now and in the past, and it's just like we're such a small country that it's bizarre that we create this much like exceptional work.
Mm. Why do you think that is, Dara? Do you have any thoughts on like why we are so good at writing?
I think we secretly love pain. I think we're and like it's geographical as well. Like we live in a country where in winter it's dark most of the time and the weather's miserable. So like that kind of forces you indoors. And I think if you're inclined to write, if you have a lot of time to write, you're going to find a lot of time to write in Ireland because there's not like because even now like living in Spain, I find it harder to write here because there's more access to being outside more often because the weather's
Mm.
better. So I think like genuinely the weather and the geography like plays a role, but I think we've all like we're natural storytellers. Even people who don't write are like the Shanakias and the you know we just have this genetic like compulsion to tell stories, and I think that's amazing. And I think it just comes from our history on this island of like being with the land and like being very close to nature and spending our evenings in the piss and rain telling each other stories to get through the night. I think that's just part of who we are. We're just storytellers, and I think that's really why we create so much incredible works of like literature and poetry, is because that's just kind of what we do as a people.
Definitely. I didn't think about the fact that we're probably locked up for what, like 6 months the year when it's
Hmm.
dark at 4 p.m. Like
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And I do find that now, like living in Spain, it's just like you can just be outside all of the time. Like and you
Hmm.
you can plan anything outside, you know it's gonna be grand, whereas in Ireland that is just not the case.
No,
So
not at all.
I mean, of course, then also leads to some negatives like defaulting to spending all of your time in the pub or like
Hmm.
anytime you're doing something with friends, it involves drinking inside,
Yeah.
as opposed to maybe doing something a little bit more healthy outside.
Hmm.
And then
Absolutely.
maybe spending so much time inside torments us even more, and then therefore the writing gets even more emotional. So
Hmm.
bit of a maybe a bit of a toxic cycle in a way.
Yeah, it is a
But
perfect storm for like, because I mean, creating good art doesn't necessarily mean like you're going to like come out the other end of it in one piece. Like, you know, sometimes you kind of have to suffer to make great art. And I think, you know, our history is suffering in Ireland. You know, we have a lot of generational trauma, and I think, you know, we do suffer, like the mental health in Ireland is quite poor.
Mm.
Um, and like, not like, in relation to the point earlier, you don't have to suffer to make good art, but I think because we suffer, we do make good art with the suffering, because that's just the cards we've been dealt.
Mm.
So there is a lot of, like, you know, good reasons we make a lot of good works of literature, and then there's also like, well, at least we're making good literature with the terrible hand we've been dealt.
We're making the most of it. Sure, look, has to be done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
um, in terms of mental health for Ireland, you mentioned there like it's pretty bad in Ireland.
Hmm.
What would be your vision for mental health in Ireland if you could be the minister for health? What would you do? What would you advise?
Well, one, I'd probably never take that job. Like, what an absolute lose-lose for everyone involved. So, like, I do respect anyone who takes those jobs. Like, it's incredibly difficult. But like, as I suppose, an armchair like activist, or whatever you want to say, like someone who can point out the issues without like knowing how to fix them. Because I don't think it's good really to like, it tends to happen, like throwing stones and screaming without actually like, so. But one thing I would fix if we could, the WHO recommends that a country of Ireland's size spend at least 10% of the overall health budget on mental health. That's like the minimum. Ireland currently spends, and like, it's 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 sneaky how they phrase this. So the mental health budget went up by 143 million this year, so there was an increase, but the overall health budget also increased. So we've actually decreased the percentage of the health budget we spend on mental health. So I think last year we were spending 7%. This year we're spending 6%. I don't think we've ever gone over 8%, in like the country's history. So like, we've never actually met the minimum threshold spend that's recommended by the WHO. And I
Mm.
think, especially when like services are so poor, you have all the issues with CAMS, the long waiting list for mental health services. Getting to that 10% should be at least a starting point for improving it, and getting more psychologists hired, and less waiting time, and just better services for children in particular. And then obviously making, and I work with a Lust for Life who are trying to put mental health education into primary and secondary schools. I think making it mandatory that children learn about mental health from an early age, and that doesn't mean like they learn about things like depression and anxiety when they're 4 years old, but they learn how to, you know, manage their emotions and identify their emotions, and, you know, learn breathing techniques. So if they're overwhelmed, they know to calm themselves down. I think that should be mandatory, because it just gives them a toolbox to look after themselves when they're feeling a lot of maybe negative or stressful emotions. So there's a lot of things we could do. A lot of things are simple, like the education thing should be simple. The budget thing, obviously more tricky, because like you need to take money from something to increase the budget. But those would be the things I'd start with.
I mean, yeah, great way to start. Like, definitely when it comes to children and giving them the tools, as you said, like to teach them emotional intelligence, probably one of the most important types of intelligence of all, because I mean, it's going to help you in every single aspect of life and dealing with things, especially if there's still stigma around mental health. Like, if you
Mm-hmm.
can rely on yourself and figure out, as you said, you know, you kind of mentioned earlier, you said, I knew my brain was like not thinking right, you know, it's being
Mm-hmm.
able to recognize that and go, okay, I can deal with this situation, you know, and having the tools
Yeah.
to navigate it yourself, that's really, really powerful. I want to ask you one really random thing, actually, Dara, if that's all
Okay.
right. And then I'm going to close with the usual question. But this one came into my head because this interview came about rather serendipitously. I'm not sure that's how you pronounce it, but
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about asking you on because I think a reel of yours had come up, and I thought that is just real, like how to be Irish vibes. Like you're kind of exactly captured it. It might have been your national anthem poem or something like that. I saw. Then I saw your face, and I was like, Jesus Christ, I really, really recognize him. And then I
Mm-hmm.
realized it's because you had a video on TikTok. This was months ago, and I saw this now. And it was basically about this lad from Cork in Barcelona who's scamming everyone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I couldn't find the original video. Would you mind explaining the whole thing again? Because absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, it is bizarre. Yeah, that's funny. Like that, because the other night I was at a going away party for my friend, and this girl from Cork who I'd never met before came up to me, and she was like, "I know you from TikTok about the guy from Cork scamming." Like, so it's funny. But yeah, so basically, like, I came here for a month in 2022 to see if I wanted to live here, basically. And I was walking home from a party at like 3 a.m. and this fella came up to me and he was like, and usually I just, especially at that time of night, I just kind of ignore everyone and keep walking. But he was like, "Sorry, could you help me?" And I realized he had a Cork accent. And I was like, "Are you from Cork?" And he was like, "I am." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And then I wanted to help him, you know?
Mhm.
Uh, and he was like, "I've started a postgrad last week. I just moved here and I can't remember where I live." And I was like, "Okay. I don't live here, so I'm probably not going to be much help." And I did feel a little bit on edge. I was like, "This feels whatever, a bit dodgy." So I was like, he was like, "Can I use your phone to ring my mother? Because I don't know why that would help." But I was like, "Yeah, look, I'm just going to hold my phone and I'll put on loudspeaker and you can talk to her." So we rang out. She didn't answer. Then he wanted to text her, so we did the same thing. He talked, I texted, we sent it off. And I was like, "Look, I have to go. It's 3 o'clock in the morning." And then he asked me for money. So I had a fiver in my pocket, so I gave it to him. Then last March, so this is like 18 months later, I'm walking out of my apartment here. And at this point now, I'm completely jaded to anyone talking to me in the street. So this guy starts talking to me, and I'm just kept walking. And then he started saying, "Oh, yeah, I just moved here last week. I started a postgrad." And I turned around and I was like, "And you can't find where you live?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "And you want to use my phone to ring your mom?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "You did this to me a year and a half ago, man. What's going on?" And he was like, "No, no, that wasn't me. That wasn't me." And I was like, "No, it definitely was you." And I was like, "I don't know what's going on with you, but like, I just don't have time for this and I need to go." And then since then, he's bumped into like, so he must be targeting Irish people because he's bumped into like three other people I know and they're all Irish doing the same thing. So, and I do feel like bad for him. Like, and I wasn't, when I made that video, I wasn't trying to like take the piss out of him or something because there's obviously something going on, possibly drug related. And I said if I bumped into him again, I'd be like, "Look, I'm not giving you money or my phone, but if you want to go get a beer with me and we can just chat and see," like, because I feel like if there is something going on and he's in trouble, I feel like if I like rang into, Neil Prendeville or something, or like reached out to one of those, like, people would put their hand in their pocket and try and help him to get him home. Like, I feel like Ireland's very good for doing stuff like that. So
Mm.
if I ever bump into him again, but I haven't seen him since that second time, which was back in April. So, but yeah, wild story that there's a man in Cork going around scamming people. A man
Absolutely.
from Cork in Barcelona. Sorry.
Yeah, it's mad. Like, I mean, obviously Barcelona is kind of like known for the scams and you have to be really careful with your phone and stuff like that. But when I just saw that there's an Irish fella from Cork of all places doing that, I
Yeah.
just thought it was,
From Ballincollig specifically, because I
oh,
chatted to him about it the first time. Because I used to
getting all
play
the detail.
basketball for Ballincollig, and I was like, "Oh, I used to play for them, man. That's gas."
That's good.
So,
Oh, sure. Look, hopefully you do run into him and maybe you'll get his life story and that would be nice. A nice way to close out the story
mm,
on TikTok, perhaps. Before we wrap up, Dara, I want to ask you the question I ask everybody. And I know you actually you nearly you mentioned it earlier, and I said, "Oh, that would have been a good segue," but I got distracted with something else. But what does it mean to you to be Irish?
yes. So, and I guess I can go with the answer I've come up with, because like people do ask, "What does it mean to be Irish?" And you can be lazy and be like, "Oh, we love the crack," or "We love drinking," or whatever. But I think that we're the most consistently average people on earth. And I don't say that as a bad thing. It sounds bad. And it's interesting, if you ever listened to Coleman Noctor talk about average and how people have like demonized and kind of made average seem like a negative thing, even though most of us are average and we have average days. But his example is like, the next time someone asks you how your day is going and you just reply saying, "Oh, I'm having an average day," they'll be like, "Oh, what's wrong?" There's nothing wrong with average, but we do think of it as a negative thing. But I think we're quite middle of the road, and I think that gives us a lot of consistency and persistency. And it's not so much, especially when it comes to like art, sport, athletic ability, achievements. We're not always the most talented people in the room, but we are the ones who show up the most, and we put in the work and we put in the graft. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Mm, absolutely. Did you say you had something to read on this?
On this theme, I do. I'll get
Yes.
it up there now.
I'd
2
love to hear
seconds.
it. It's a very interesting idea, consistently
Sorry, I'm
average, and
cutting
particularly
camera.
looking at average as the glass half full as opposed to the glass half empty.
Exactly, because I think it's like average. Even for me, like I have like negative connotations with average, but I I would say it's like average is like being the most consistent. Like you're not overperforming or underperforming ever. You're always there, coming back day after day,
Hmm.
and that's kind of what this poem's about. And it's called Consistently Average because I was like, I'm going to write a poem about this, so the next time someone asks in a performance, I can just read them this. So this is Consistently Average. Handshake while people reach for handshakes. Insecurity rattles around the brain like 2 pennies in a glass jar. How do we even get this far? Not the best by any stretch, but consistently not terrible. Terrible paper name tags makes it more confusing for people to refer to me because the last 2 letters of my name have taken a vow of silence. So I explain it again and again. Eyes look up at me like I should know something, but I'm like the world's worst detective because I haven't got a clue. What am I to do? I'm not the best at this, I just have an ability to be consistently enjoyable. Something you can tolerate, swallow down without a fuss. Everyone likes vanilla ice cream, but it's sort of a red flag if it's your first choice. Still, I stand up, stand out, speak loud, but never shout. This is how you can use your voice to make people feel things. Use your words to connect. Probably the closest thing we have to the spells cast in the boglands when harvests were needed to survive the harshest winters. Hands bloodied from splinters inflicted as our people pushed carts to market stalls, crooked-backed and desperate. Pale-skinned without the privilege that now comes with this complexion. And the mother must have pitied us. She never sent us hurricanes. Snow was rare and transient. We learned to complain about the rain sent as a gift for crops to grow so maybe we could survive. December rarely froze us, and July was cool enough for us to work the fields without the rapture of the sun causing our milky skins to blister. We never learned to only be satisfied with everything. Nothing less than perfect would only be worth it to men who never had want of anything. So now when I stand in rooms, bright eyes asking me for knowledge, I tell them the scripture written in my Celtic veins. We grew knowing that scraping by on little was good enough. Survival worth the damage. The land taught us reliability is virtuous. Perfection is short-lived, but there's consistency in average. And that's that.
Really, really powerful. I was laughing at your comment about your last 2 letters in your name. Having
Yeah.
to explain that because I think I told someone I was interviewing you, and they're like, I was like Daragh, and they were like, God, I've never heard it spelled like that. I was like, what? They were Irish themselves. I was like,
Oh,
I'm
really?
surprised. Yeah, I
Must
was
be
like,
a Cork thing.
maybe it is. I don't know. What's next for Dara? What do you have coming up soon? You've probably got November. You'll be busy with that.
November, yeah. So we're doing a 30-day poetry kind of extravaganza where I've convinced 30 poets to share poetry on men's health issues, and we'll be putting them on socials across the month and try to raise money for November. The show with Louise Kennedy's coming out on the 9th or the 21st of October. And then I'll be performing in Dublin 23rd, 24th, 25th, and then I'll also be back to perform at the start of December. So if people want to see those shows, they can just check out my socials. And then after that, I have a new book coming out in March with Broken Sleep Books, and that's another collection of essays. So very excited about that.
Brilliant. And what's the theme of those essays, or do you know that
So
yet?
the book is called A Brief Inhalation, and the theme of the book is basically any moments that kind of cause you to be like, so it could be scary moments, funny moments, surprising moments in life. That's kind of the uh, connective tissue of the book. But it's all like essays about very different things. Like one of the essays I can give away is about the ordeal with the catfishing and stuff. There's an essay in
Okay.
there about that, for example. So yeah, looking forward to it. Creative nonfiction is definitely having a moment, which is great because I love writing in that genre. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Brilliant stuff, Daragh. And we can vote for you for the Mental Health Media Award, right?
You can indeed. So for the Shine Audience Choice Awards, I think, if I'm not mistaken, voting it closes on the 27th of October. So there's still another 10 days or so. The link is in my link tree. It'll also be on Headlines, Instagram and stuff. So if people want to vote for me, I'd be very grateful. Although, like, the long list is incredible and there's absolutely incredible work on it. So I'm just happy to be on that list because I think there's a lot more deserving people of that award on that list. But it's very humbling to be among them.
Brilliant. Well, fair play to you. I wish you all the best with your writing, and I'm
Thank
looking
you.
forward to both hearing more and reading more in the near future. And thank you again so much for coming on the podcast. It's been wonderful to chat to you, Daragh.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
Gurv Mila Slán.